I can remember the first few times I ever came to the city, the weather was beautifully sunny, and I know that's not always the case, but to me it just sparkles in the sunshine.
Welcome to Aberdeen, the Granite City. With a population of 220,000, it is home to some of the biggest economic advantages in the UK. The most diverse city in Scotland, we welcome the world with open arms. The city has stunning coastlines and shores, and some of the most unspoilt landscapes on our doorsteps. Alongside this is our stunning architecture throughout our granite streets. Our rich history sits alongside an innovative modernity, shaping the place we call Aberdeen today. Our economy boasts 2 world-class universities that spearheads cutting-edge research and life sciences. It has a mix of fish processing and a world-renowned food industry. And its strong public service sector sits alongside vital, innovative medical research. It's a city that isn't defined by the culture and politics of London, or the Scottish Central Belt for that matter. Rather, its gaze is more towards the north and the expansive North Sea it rests upon. What also makes the city unique is our economy. Being the oil capital of Europe, our politics are focused far more closely on the oil industry. But Aberdeen is a city in transition now. It is pushed and pulled by international events like oil price crashes and global warming, as well as more domestic ones like Brexit. And the impact on Aberdeen is significant. This documentary will look at some of the issues Aberdeen has experienced, and now experiences, and think about what that means for our city, as we transition into a new and potentially complex future. Oil and gas sits at the heart of the Aberdeen economy. Its discovery in the 1970s transformed Aberdeen from a city specialising in granite, textiles and fishing into the high-tech, modern, bustling and successful city it has become.
And oil and gas, of course, is central to the economy in Aberdeen as well. It's a very successful economy. In fact, it's probably the most successful per capita in Scotland. The GVA, the gross value added figures tell us that.
But Aberdeen is a single industry city, with 50% of its employment connected to the oil and gas sector through the supporting research, manufacturing and service industries. And oil has created huge wealth. But it's a wealth that sits almost in a bubble, quite separate from the rest of the Aberdeen economy. The high wages that oil brings also brings a high cost of living, and that creates significant difficulties for others in the city.
I mean, it's made it a very affluent city, but a city which is difficult to live in for the average worker, which is why we struggle with teachers, with public service workers, because the house prices, cost of living and everything else is high as a consequence.
Essential skilled labour becomes squeezed out of the city then, and this leads to a lack of balance in the economy, with many people struggling as a result. The volatility of oil and the radical seesawing of prices also sees huge booms and busts, and with the bust periods there comes significant dearth.
But in other ways it's much more exposed because it's so heavily reliant on the oil industry and on the fate of the oil price. If the oil price goes up, things are more buoyant here. If the oil price goes down, things struggle a bit here. We saw that with the redundancies that there were when the oil price crashed.
And there have been many crashes. Significant crashes having deep-seated effects of poverty and uncertainty for our communities and business. The downturn of 2014, for instance, caused huge shockwaves in Aberdeen.
You always get this cycles, this dips, these boom and bust that we've seen down the years. 86 was a really bad one, and nobody I know of thought we'd ever see anything like it again. But this one has been horrendous. And the impact of that you're seeing in the town just now. There's pubs, clubs, restaurants, shops shutting down, small businesses, cafes, all that kind of stuff are struggling. So it's been pretty devastating on the whole region.
For local businesses then, this loss has been difficult, with a huge rate of business closures after 2014, and business startups dropping by a fifth. The fate of small businesses was particularly bad, having the slowest rate of growth anywhere within the UK. And of course, there were huge job losses.
In 2014, there were 460,000 people jobs across the UK dependent on the North Sea oil industry. Today we have, I think, roughly 280,000 jobs dependent on what's happening. That's a colossal drop. There's about 60,000 jobs in Scotland, and the bulk of that will be in Aberdeen.
The unemployment and downturn in small businesses, as well as the slight exodus of the young and working age population, creates concerns for Aberdeen as it moves forward then. The shock of 2014 has also raised anxieties that the next bust period may just mean the end of the high-skill, high-wage economy that the oil sector has brought. But are these problems really inevitable? We tend to think that bust periods just automatically lead to a terrible impact on our communities. And we tend to view it with an almost passive acceptance that this is just the way it has to be. But other countries show us that this is actually not the case. Other countries, like Norway, plan. High unemployment, business loss and fragile communities are not actually inevitable in Norway. Because they have a strategy that tries to prevent these issues impacting upon communities. With the same levels of oil production as the UK and a population the size of Scotland, Norway created a sovereign wealth fund, a rainy day savings account built up from oil revenues. Holding $1 trillion, it is the biggest fund of its kind anywhere in the world. But more importantly, that fund is kept to ensure financial security for its citizens.
That's what the fund is there for in Norway. That's what it's being used for. You know, when workers are made redundant in Norway from the energy sector, they're able to sustain a standard of living which allows them to continue to contribute to the economy. They're not queuing up at food banks. There's a fund there.
Contrast this with the effects of the 2014 crash and a decade of austerity. For the first time in Aberdeen, we have seen redundant oil workers turning to food banks in desperation. A very stark contrast of what our reality is here and what might be with different political choices. Importantly, the Norway Fund is also used to stabilise the economy and help prevent the economic slowdowns that can happen with oil.
Stavanger hasn't actually seen massive falls in its economy. It hasn't, the oil price hasn't really impacted there anything like it has. So, but other countries haven't been having the same problems because they've anticipated that oil prices are volatile. They've invested in oil funds. They've invested in new technology. They've invested in innovation.
After the oil price crash in 2014, Norway used its oil fund to prevent its economy from sinking. This didn't completely protect Norway from the effects of the oil price crash, but its strategic planning offers a stability for its workers and communities. Planning, however, is very much absent within the UK thinking. For the UK has developed a very short-term and chaotic approach to our economy as far back as Thatcher. The treatment of the coal industry highlights this very clearly. As inevitable as this decline might have been, the lack of a planned transition created real distress for mining communities.
You know, we saw the damage that the collapse of the coal industry in the UK, especially in parts of the central belt of Scotland, did to the communities, never mind the economy. In the 1980s, when the heart and soul was ripped out of those communities, when mining was closed and no alternative source of income, no alternative industry was available, I think that's been one of the biggest crimes for our community economies that has happened. And we cannot afford for the same thing to happen to the oil and gas communities, and especially to those affected in Aberdeen.
With unemployment levels reaching as high as 50%, the effects are still felt today, 35 years on. And this becomes a stark lesson for us as we think about the future of oil and the future of Aberdeen. Because the same patterns are repeated here. A pattern that has come to define how the UK works. It lets declining industries crumble by the wayside. It leaves a scrap heap of redundant workers, struggling businesses unsupported, and communities vulnerable.
It hasn't managed the oil and gas industry properly, and also in terms of Norway in particular, a large percentage of the profits are actually generated by a nationalised oil company, Statoil, and if you compare that to the make money quick cash cow attitude that the UK government's had to it, then it's that's actually caused the problem, not the dependency on oil itself, on gas itself.
What has come to define a UK strategy is actually a financial mismanagement that considers only short-term economic benefit, at considerable cost to our people, local business and communities. And Aberdeen cannot afford to be the result of yet another example of this UK mismanagement. More than this though, our natural resources and wealth have been squandered.
What happened in Norway should have been replicated in Scotland. Had it been the case, Scotland now, I believe, would be the wealthiest country in Europe, and Aberdeen would be the wealthiest city in Europe, had Scotland had full control as an independent country over all the oil that lay in its waters. I mean, it's a tragedy of epic proportions what's happened to North Sea oil.
Of course, this mismanagement seems to have crescendoed into pure economic self-harm as we fall off the cliff into Brexit chaos. Against all the evidence that Brexit will be bad for the economy, it is being pursued regardless, with no consideration for the effects that this has on society.
Now we have a case study of the UK government actually promoting and following a policy which it knows full well will cost tens of thousands of people in Scotland their jobs. They know full well it will increase the cost of living. It's following a strategy which is deliberately and aggressively going to harm Scotland's economy.
And Aberdeen is set to take the worst pounding from this, tipped to be the worst affected city within the UK. It's not just the uncertainty it gives to the oil industry, but the massive disruption it has on Aberdeen's other industries like agriculture, food and technology and research. Brexit will also cause massive problems recruiting essential public service workers like teachers and nurses, creating even more strain on our communities whose educational and health needs lie unsupported. A post-Brexit Aberdeen paints a severe and gruelling picture then, as our industries, public services and opportunities drastically decline. Brexit is not a blip within the UK structure though. It becomes the inevitable conclusion of many decades of financial mismanagement and its short-term chaotic policies. But this doesn't need to be the case. This does not need to be the future of Aberdeen or Scotland. A Brexit economic disaster cannot be all our city deserves. Can we really afford to wait around and hope that the UK will come to its senses? Because the UK can't plan for next week. Let provide a long-term economic strategy for Aberdeen. We deserve so much better. And we cannot allow Aberdeen to be left by the wayside against the Brexit chaos. There surely has to be another way forward that can protect our city and our jobs. That can build a positive future for Aberdeen, one that builds prosperity, and one that recognises all our needs within Aberdeen.
It's in the first instance, I suppose, creating a plan.